The Washington State House of Representatives in 1955 probably had no idea that they were making history when they elected as Speaker of the House John L. O'Brien, an influential Democrat from Seattle's Rainier Valley. From 1955 to 1963, a record 8 years, Speaker O'Brien would preside over the House as no other speaker ever has. With what the Olympian called the quickest gavel west of the Pecos and his phenomenal knowledge of parliamentary procedure, O'Brien truly ruled his House.
He was very firm in his rulings, but he was fair, and he gave both sides of the aisle the right to speak on issues, and he recognized their positions, and in his ruling on points of order and things like that, I'm confident from what I observed and what I heard that he didn't let partisan politics interfere. I think he called them as he saw them, and was fair and was regarded as a good speaker, and that's why he lasted so long.
As a leader in the House for a record 44 years, John O'Brien used his unparalleled parliamentary knowledge to great effect. Employing his experience as a vast resource of procedure, O'Brien used his superior knowledge to foil legislative opponents and to get his legislation through the difficult system. A pillar of integrity, O'Brien's skills and conciliatory approach to lawmaking were equally respected on both sides of the aisle. Senator Slade Gorton, a former Republican leader in the State House who often found himself on the wrong end of Speaker O'Brien's gavel, said, "John L. O'Brien remains, in my mind, the model of an efficient and effective presiding officer. I have never, from that day to this, observed a better one." Well, John L. O'Brien's legislative accomplishments during his 52 years in Olympia are innumerable and legendary. The right to public ownership of our power, rights for the disabled, full funding of education, our modern highways and bridges, environmental preservation, civil rights, and that list goes on and on.
John O'Brien is, he's touched the mountains, he's touched the valleys, he's touched the rivers, the lakes, the shorelands. He's touched the farming, our industry, the Boeing airplane company being here, Boeing being synonymous with freedom. He's touched every facet of life here. He touched the educational institutions in the state, and he's touched all the people in the state, directly or indirectly, by working to enhance and raise the quality of life for the people who live here.
In a career spanning over a half of Washington State's existence, John O'Brien, perhaps more than any other Washingtonian, shaped our state's growth and emergence as a major economic and social center. His leadership over a half a century helped transform our legislature into a national model of progressive, effective government.
He had a vision of society that the quality of life of the people in society could be enhanced, and he used his powers of his position to try to do that. A person like that who doesn't work for something, but they work at something, has a vision greater than themselves, and he always did have one. And it was always to serve the people of this state to the best of his abilities.
While his record 52 years of dedication to his state will never be duplicated or forgotten, John O'Brien's dedication to his community is the standard by which he always judged himself. Born in the Rainier Valley to Irish immigrant parents, John L. O'Brien was the eldest of 4 children who would become fatherless before John's 10th birthday. John's father, James O'Brien, from Cork, Ireland, was a Seattle police detective who was shot and killed while attempting to stop a cop killer. With very little savings and an insufficient pension from the police, John's mother, Mary, sent him to work at Keef's Grocery just around the corner from the O'Brien house on Findlay Avenue. For $3 a week, John worked at the grocery all through his high school years at O'Day, where he graduated in the class of 1929. After earning his CPA degree from the University of Washington and then joining the Coast Guard, John established himself as a successful young businessman. John became an extremely active member of his home community in the Rainier Valley and joined the Rainier Businessman's Club. And it is from this club that John first got involved in a unique Rainier Valley celebration called the Rainier Powwow, an event that to this day is synonymous with the name John L. O'Brien.
John was appointed to head the annual powwow, which was an annual celebration. I think he still does that at the present time. And I was glad to see him appointed there, and I told him there's only one thing I wanted him to do for me is make me chairman of the Queen's Committee so I could pick the pretty girls for the for the festival.
Mount Baker, Rainier Valley, the Seward Park area was highlighted by powwow, and that was John O'Brien's special program. And many times, you know, they would lose funding on the powwow, or somebody couldn't get the chairman that year, or something would happen, and they'd say, well, maybe we won't have the powwow again this year. And it would begin to die down, but oh, John was always there to see that the powwow went on again.
Having been active in local politics for a few years, in 1938, John ran for the vacant state Senate seat in the old 33rd Legislative District. This also happened to be the seat that young Al Rossellini was after.
The first time we met was when we were campaigning against each other, which was way back in 1938 for the legislature. We both decided to run for the legislature from the old 33rd District, and I think there were 5 of us seeking the Democratic nomination, and my recollection is that it's the first time I got acquainted with him. Mm-hmm. And although we competed against each other there, later we became good friends over the years, of course.
Rossellini narrowly defeated John, but O'Brien made it to Olympia the next year when he filled an empty House seat left by the passing of Harry Austin. John was elected to the House in 1940, and apart from a 2-year sabbatical in the mid-40s, he would spend the next 52 years in the House of Representatives. John and Mary O'Brien were married in 1952 at St. Edward's Church, less than a stone's throw from John's childhood home. At the time, John O'Brien was one of the most influential legislators in the state, and in a couple of years he would become Speaker of the House. But John refused to ever allow his foremost commitments, those to his family and community, suffer because of his powerful position.
Was a good family man, raised 5 or 6 children, I think he wound up with, and was always concerned about his family. Mary came down in Olympia and stayed there after the children were a little older, and all the way through I think he was a typically good example of a good legislator and a good public servant.
John's family has always played a major role in his politics, and since John and Mary's marriage, his family has never been far from his office. Mary's long been a community activist and John's most formidable lobbyist. And each of the O'Brien children at one time or another served as a page in the House. Perhaps that was John's way of lowering legislative expenses. While John L. O'Brien is a noted teacher of the procedural processes of the legislature, his success in Olympia undoubtedly was due to his willingness to learn. Since John's very first days in Olympia, he has been a true student of the legislative process. And what drove John to remain in public service has been his fascination with lawmaking and its ability to help those in need.
We always thought of him as you would to, yes, a revered teacher, but remember, he also was someone who took the role as a student. John learned a lot from us and many times would call and say, what is really going on this particular issue? I've had 2 people come up to me and tell me that there's 2 different sides to this and everything is going wrong. And they're very angry with me, and what do I do about this particular problem? He would learn from us, and of course he would take everybody's opinions and then he would make his own.
O'Brien's unflagging and deep personal commitment to his constituents enabled John to be re-elected a record 25 times. But his efforts over this past half-century on behalf of his community also resulted in his closest friendships. Whether fellow public officials, constituents, or lobbyists, John O'Brien befriended just about everyone he met.
We met in Olympia. I was just a graduate student, just graduated from Seattle University in I think it was 1948, right around that time, and I was asked to go down and meet with him. Found out where he lived, and I went down and knocked on the door about 5:30 in the morning, and pretty soon he answered in his shorts, and he looked at me and he says, "What on earth are you doing down at this time of day?" And I said, "Well, that's the only time I get a hold of you. Well, come on in." And so that was our beginning, and he listened to me, and he got dressed and told me there was other times a day that I could contact him and I didn't have to do this at 5:30 in the morning. But we've been great friends ever since.
Well, perhaps at no other time in his career did John L. O'Brien use his savvy more effectively than when he successfully fought for the legislation designating Mother Joseph as the subject of this state's second statue in Statuary Hall in Washington, D.C. After years of debate about the appropriateness of having a Catholic nun represent our state and subsequent funding difficulties, O'Brien finally got the legislation passed. In May of 1980, John would preside over the unveiling of the Mary Joseph statue in our nation's capital. The existence of this symbol of his state and his church is one of John's proudest achievements. In recognition of the gifts that John O'Brien's Luck of the Irish has given to our state, including the ever-popular murals of the Seven Labors of Hercules, Governor Booth Gardner, with unanimous consent of the state legislature, proclaimed St. Patrick's Day, 1989, John L. O'Brien Recognition Day. Also that day, what had long been the House Office Building was officially and eternally renamed the John L. O'Brien Building. And on March 17th of this year, another St. Patrick's Day, of course, John L. O'Brien was unanimously elected and proclaimed Washington's first and only Speaker Emeritus of the House of Representatives.
His record will always stand. He'll stand alone as being the most distinguished, recognized Speaker Emeritus in the state of Washington, in the history of the state of Washington, because there probably won't be another one because of the term limits. But he stands as a shining example to young people, and therefore that's why the employees and directors and officers of Pembroke Financial Center are offering a scholarship in John and Mary's honor. There'll be 2 scholarships a year granted to students of their choice for the next 5 years. That's 10 scholarships, each worth $3,000. And we'd hope through the granting of these scholarships that their example as public citizens and the values and principles they stood for will be passed on through these recipients from one generation to the other, and therefore the O'Brien traditions and the O'Brien principles will continue.
John O'Brien's investment in the future of our state has indeed been profound. His never-ceasing energy and enthusiasm for public service serves not only as the finest example for our elected officials today, but it also enables us to continue to benefit from the character, the wisdom, and the commitment of our friend, John L. O'Brien.